The lock hit like a gunshot in the dark. Metal against metal. Final. Then his footsteps moved away from the door. Slow. Calm. Not rushed. I screamed his name once. He did not answer. The basement went quiet in a way I had never known before. The air felt heavy. Cold. Wrong. My hands were shaking so bad I could not feel the wall anymore. I called again. Louder this time. Nothing came back to me but the sound of my own panic. Then my husband leaned close and whispered into my ear, so low I almost did not hear him. Quiet. I have a secret. That whisper scared me more than the lock, because it told me this was not chaos. This was planned. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time does strange things when fear wraps around your chest. My knees finally gave out, and I slid down the wall onto the cold floor. My heart was beating so hard it hurt my ears. It was only then, sitting in that darkness, that I understood what had just happened. Our own son had locked us in. My name is Ruth. I am 62 years old. I have lived in Baltimore my whole life. I raised that boy with my own hands. I fed him, prayed for him, fought for him. And now I was sitting in the dark, because of him. My chest was tight. My hands would not stop shaking. I could hear my husband breathing fast beside me. I whispered, "What secret could be worse than this?" He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was broken. "I should have told you years ago, Ruth." And in that moment, I knew the door was not the first thing that had closed on us that night. The dark makes memories louder. That is what nobody tells you. When you lose light, you do not lose sight. You lose control. And everything you ever tried to forget comes walking back to sit beside you. I kept seeing him as a boy. Skinny legs. Missing tooth smile. Running into the house after school asking what was for dinner. That child could not be the same voice that walked away from that locked door. My husband sat beside me, his back against the wall. I could hear his breath shaking. Not from the cold. From the weight of whatever that secret was. I asked him again. "What did you mean you should have told me years ago?" He said, "Later. I will tell you later." There was no later down there. Only now. I tried to stand and rattled the door with my hands. The sound echoed like a shout in a grave. I called our son again. I used his full name the way I did when he was in trouble as a child. There was still no answer. Then I heard movement upstairs. Not rushing. Not hiding. Walking. Like someone who had no fear. My husband whispered, "He is not alone." That is when my stomach turned. There had been strange things these past months. Missed calls he would not explain. Money he never asked for. A new calm in his eyes that did not feel like peace. It felt like distance. I told myself he was grown. I told myself to stay out of his business. I told myself not to worry. Now I was shaking in a basement because I chose peace over truth. My husband leaned his head back against the wall and finally said it. "Our son has been in trouble for a long time." I asked what kind of trouble. He said the kind where doors lock and people disappear. I wrapped my arms around myself and asked the question that broke me. "Did you know he could do this?" He did not answer. And that silence told me everything I was afraid to hear. In the quiet after that silence, I started noticing things I had ignored for months. Little moments that felt small back then but heavy now. The way our son stopped hugging me goodbye. The way he would step outside to take his calls. The way my husband would go quiet every time his name appeared on his phone. I whispered, "How long have you known?" My husband did not answer at first. His breath slowed like he was trying to hold himself together from the inside. "Weeks," he said. Weeks felt like years in that basement. I asked what changed weeks ago. He said he followed him one night. I told him that was wrong. You do not follow your own child unless you already believe something is broken. He said he needed to know where the money was coming from. The new car. The expensive shoes. The way our son suddenly paid for dinner without blinking. I asked where he followed him to. He said an empty warehouse near the old shipyard. That word shipyard made my stomach sink. Nothing good ever came from that place. Not jobs. Not futures. He said our son did not go alone. Men were already waiting. They greeted him like he belonged. I asked what they talked about. He said he could not hear everything. But he saw an exchange. A bag changing hands. A nod. A look of understanding. I said, "You never told me." He said, "I wanted to protect you." That made me angry in a way I could not explain. Protection should never come from silence. Silence is how danger grows roots. The footsteps upstairs returned. Slower this time. Closer. I whispered, "He knows we are talking." My husband said, "He already knew before we opened our mouths down here." Then we heard something slide across the floor above us. Heavy. Like furniture being dragged. And in that moment I understood something I did not want to believe. This was not about punishment. This was about control. The sound of that furniture scraping across the floor stayed in my bones. It was slow and deliberate, like someone marking territory. I whispered his name again, softer this time. Not as a command but as a plea. There was still no answer. My husband shifted beside me. I could feel the weight of his regret in the way he moved. I asked him what else he saw at that warehouse. I told him he was done protecting me with silence. He said there was a woman there. Not young. Not old. Hanging back like she was watching everything but saying nothing. He said our son looked at her for approval before he did anything. That made my chest tighten in a way fear alone could not explain. "So now he answers to someone else," I said. He said, "I think he always has." The darkness pressed in. I felt like the basement was shrinking around us. I told my husband about the last argument I had with our son weeks ago. I told him how I warned our boy that whatever money he was touching did not smell clean. I told him how he looked at me like I was already behind him in life. My husband went quiet after that. Then I said the thing I had been holding since the lock clicked shut. "If you knew he was dangerous, why did you come down here with me tonight?" My husband swallowed hard. I could hear it. "Because I knew he was going to do something," he said. "And I thought if we stayed close, we could stop it." I almost laughed from the pain in my chest. Stop it. From the basement. The footsteps stopped directly above us again. The house creaked like it was holding its breath. I felt my heart hammer against my ribs. I imagined his shadow standing right over our heads, listening to every word we whispered. Then his voice came through the floor, calm and steady. "You both need to rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." That was the first time I realized something else. He was not afraid of the morning. He was planning it. When his footsteps finally drifted away from the door, my husband leaned closer to me again. His voice was barely a sound, but it carried more weight than the lock ever could. He said, "Ruth, our son is not just in trouble. He is in business." That word did not make sense at first. Business sounded clean, organized, safe. I told him he was not making sense. He said the men at that warehouse were not buyers and sellers the way we once knew them. They were movers of people and money that could not be traced. He said our son was not running errands. He was managing exchanges. I asked him how he knew that. He said one of those men recognized him from years ago. From something he wished he had never been part of. He said the man smiled like he was greeting an old debt. My stomach turned so hard I thought I might be sick right there on the floor. I whispered, "Why are you only telling me this now?" He said, "Because now he has used it against us." That was when the truth finally sank where fear alone could not reach. We were not locked in for discipline. We were locked in for leverage. My husband said our son had been building something for months, and it was reaching a point where loose ends could not exist. Parents were loose ends. I felt my whole body go cold. I said he would not hurt us. My husband answered with the kind of truth that does not raise its voice. He already has. Then he told me why our son had turned into this man. Years ago, money came into our home that did not belong to us. It paid for comfort. It paid for silence. It paid for a future that demanded repayment with interest. I covered my mouth when I understood. Our son did not just choose this life. This life was waiting on him. And now it had come to collect through us. I did not scream when he finished telling me. I did not cry either. My body shut down in a strange, quiet way. Like something inside me folded itself up and went still. I sat there in the dark thinking about every time I stretched $1. Every prayer I prayed over that boy. Every night I stayed up waiting for him to come home safe. All of it felt like it had slipped through my fingers without me noticing. My husband reached for my hand. His was cold. I pulled mine back. "You let that money sit in our house," I said. "You let it feed our child." He said, "I told myself I was fixing something. I told myself I could make it right before anyone noticed." I said, "You never once told yourself to tell your wife." His breath broke then. That was the first real sound of collapse I heard from him. The walls felt closer. The air felt thin. I pressed my palms to my knees to keep myself steady. My heart was beating too fast for my age. I could feel it climbing my throat. I said, "So all this time, while I was praying for protection, you were praying nobody would come knocking?" He said my name like it was an apology and a confession at the same time. I stood up too fast and the room tilted. For a moment I thought I might fall. I did not. I planted my feet and held onto the wall. "This is your fault and his," I said. "And now I am sitting in the dark because of it." The silence between us was thick and ugly. Then I heard the footsteps again. Slower than before. Closer. They stopped at the top of the stairs. A voice came through the door. Soft. Controlled. "Are you both still alive down there?" I did not answer. My husband did. And the sound of his voice shaking told me something I was not ready to face. Whatever was coming next, my husband was already afraid to meet it. He stood at the door a long time before he spoke again. I could feel him through the wood, the weight of him, the finalness of where he placed his feet. "You both need to listen now," he said. "No jailing. No banging. No calling anyone. If I hear any of that, things change." I said his name through the door, soft and tired. I told him I just wanted to see his face. I told him I was his mother. He did not raise his voice. That is what scared me most. "You are not my mother in this situation," he said. "You are part of the problem that made me." My husband said his name like he was reaching for the boy he remembered. There was a pause. Then our son spoke again, colder now. "Do not use that tone with me. The one that makes you feel innocent." I felt my breath catch. He had never spoken to his father that way. Not even as a teenager. My husband said, "We raised you with love." Our son let out a quiet sound that was almost a laugh. "You raised me with lies and blood money. Love was just the noise on top." I pressed my hand against the door. The wood was cold. Solid. Unmoved by any of it. I said, "Whatever you are wrapped up in, we can fix this. Together." He answered fast. Too fast. "There is no together anymore." Then he told us the rules. We stay quiet. We eat when food comes down. We do not try the door again. We do not call for help. We do not speak about what he is building upstairs. If we follow the rules, we live. If we do not, he said, consequences will be faster than forgiveness. My stomach twisted at that word. Consequences. Spoken by Fiam, my baby's mouth, like he learned it as a weapon. His footsteps turned away again. The lock clicked once more. And with that sound, I understood the shift that had just happened. We were no longer his parents. We were his prisoners. The quiet after he left felt heavier than when he stood at the door. It was the kind of quiet that presses on your chest and makes every breath feel borrowed. I slid back down the wall and closed my eyes. My body felt tired in a way sleep could not fix. I said my husband's name once. Not angry. Just empty. He knew what I was asking without me saying it. This did not start with the basement, did it? He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice sounded older than I had ever heard it. No. The word landed between us like rotten wood. He told me years ago, before our son finished high school, there had been an offer. Easy money. Temporary help. A man he used to know from back in the day. He told me he said yes because college was coming and our savings were thin and his pride was loud. He said the money came fast. Too fast. And once it did, the man never really left. They did not come to our door. They came to our son. They watched him grow. They waited. My hands were shaking again. I said, so while I was teaching him right from wrong, someone else was teaching him survival. My husband whispered yes. That was the poison. Slow. Quiet. Dripped into our house without my knowing. I was angry, yes. But underneath that anger was a deeper hurt. I had been a stranger in my own marriage and an outsider in my own son's story. I said, he did not just wake up and become this. My husband said no. He was shaped. Above us, a door upstairs opened and closed. Voices murmured. Not ours. I realized then that whatever my husband had unleashed years ago had grown beyond him. Beyond us. I pressed my hand to my chest and felt my heart struggling to keep its rhythm. The truth had finally reached me, and it burned colder than fear. The next time he came to the door, he did not come alone with his voice. He brought proof. We heard the latch turn from the outside. The door did not open, but something slid through the small gap at the bottom. Papers. A thin folder. It stopped at my feet like an offering and a warning at the same time. He said, I am not here to argue tonight. I am here to make sure you understand what silence is worth. My hands shook as I picked up the folder. Even in the dim light, I could see numbers. Dates. Names I did not recognize. Bank transfers. Properties. Photographs. One picture made my breath leave me. It was my husband. Younger. Standing beside a man I had never seen. Holding a briefcase like it weighed more than it should. The date at the bottom was from the year our son turned 10. I looked at my husband. He did not deny it. He did not look away either. His eyes were wet and tired. Our son said through the door, I built what I built because I learned early that truth does not protect anyone. Money does. I whispered, this is what you think justice is. He answered, this is what survival looks like. He told us there were eyes on the house. That if we disappeared quietly, life would continue smoothly around us. That neighbors would assume illness, travel, anything that did not require questions. Then he offered the condition. If we stayed silent, if we did not reach for help, if we did not fight the walls that held us, eventually he would let us walk out. My husband said, when? Our son paused before answering. When I am finished. That word finished felt endless. He told us to read every page. I did not have to. The truth was already heavier than paper. Judgment had begun. And it was not being handed down by strangers. It was being delivered by the son I once rocked to sleep. By the time the first day had passed, I felt hollow. The basement had grown smaller in my mind than it actually was, and the walls seemed to lean in closer with every breath. My husband sat beside me, silent and broken, while I traced the edges of the folder he had slid under the door the night before. Every photo, every number, every document was a cut I could not heal. I asked him if he ever imagined it would come to this. He said he did, sometimes in quiet moments, but he always hoped it would never reach our son. I shook my head. Hope had nothing to do with survival. We spoke in whispers because the house above us was alive with movement. I could hear her again, the woman he had been working with, laughing quietly or perhaps speaking softly to someone else. I realized she had a role in all this, and it made the weight of betrayal heavier. Our son was not alone. He had partners, advisors, people who watched and waited. I pressed my hands to my knees and let the tears come. Not for me. Not yet. For the boy I raised, for the father who had lied, for the family that had built a foundation on choices I had never agreed to. Silent rage simmered underneath everything. I did not yell. I could not. Anger in this room, in this situation, was dangerous. Silence became the weapon we had to carry until the morning. Hours later, my husband whispered things he had never said aloud. About mistakes. About regrets. About how he believed the path he took would protect us. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to tell him it did not matter anymore. But the sound of footsteps above reminded me that he had made us a part of his son's world of leverage and control. The truth had arrived like cold poison, and it had left a scar that would not heal easily. When the small door rattled again, I realized something. This was only the beginning. The basement was not just a room. It was the place where our lives had shifted, where fear had become our companion, and where the choices of the past were now fully illuminated in the dark. We were trapped, yes, but the deeper scar was in understanding that our own decisions had helped shape the child who now ruled over us. Days blurred together in that basement. The food came sporadically, a small tray pushed through the slot in the door. Water, bread, sometimes leftovers from the kitchen. I learned to eat slowly, to make each bite last, because I did not know when the next tray would appear. Hunger became more than physical. It was a constant reminder of control. My husband and I spoke in whispers, mostly to keep ourselves from going completely mad, mostly to keep the walls from hearing us. He told me things he had kept hidden for years, things about money, debts, and deals that I had never known. I realized then that my life with him had always been built on choices I did not make. Decisions that shaped our son in ways neither of us could fully grasp. And now, in the dark, those past decisions were fully alive, coming back to punish us. I tried to sit quietly, but my mind raced. I thought about every argument I had with our son, every warning I had given, every prayer I had whispered over him at night. I wondered where I had failed, what I had missed, and why my husband had not told me sooner. Anger and grief fought for space inside me. But there was no room for release. The basement kept it all bottled up. Footsteps upstairs reminded me that we were never alone. The woman, the partner, was always there. Sometimes I heard her speaking softly to our son. Laughter that made my stomach twist. She was not scared of him. She had accepted him as he was, and that made me understand just how far gone he had become. At night, I pressed my hands to my chest and tried to remember him as a child. But the memory was slippery, like sand through fingers. He was gone. The boy I loved had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. And every whisper from my husband only confirmed it. He knew more about the choices that had shaped our son than I ever could. By the end of the day, I realized something terrifying. This was not just about the basement. It was about the entire life we had lived, the mistakes we had made, and the power we had lost without ever realizing it. The next day brought a new sound I had not expected. A woman's voice, soft but firm, drifting through the floorboards above us. I could not see her, but I knew she was there. The way our son spoke to her, it was almost gentle, almost respectful. Not a word directed at us, just a rhythm of conversation that made me feel invisible and exposed at the same time. My husband leaned closer. He whispered, "She is part of it. From the beginning." I swallowed hard. That word, it felt heavy, heavy enough to crush the little hope I had left. I asked him if she had known all along. He said yes, and I realized that for months, I had been surrounded by secrets inside our own home. My own child, my own husband, and now someone else I had never met, all conspiring around me while I thought we were safe. I tried to make sense of it, to find a corner of our son I recognized. But I could not. He was calm with her, patient even, while he had turned the basement into a cage. I thought back to the boy who used to spill juice on the carpet and laugh when we scolded him. That boy did not exist anymore. The man upstairs, the one who dictated our lives, had learned lessons I could not imagine. We whispered quietly about what this could mean. My husband admitted that her presence shifted the power balance in ways he had feared. She was not a helper, she was a partner. Our son had found someone who understood him fully, someone who could enforce his rules in ways even he could not alone. And in that realization, the walls of the basement felt smaller, tighter, suffocating. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to remember my own strength. I told my husband we had to hold on, even if just for our sanity. He nodded silently, though I could feel his own despair. The truth was clear. Our son's world had grown beyond what either of us had imagined, and we were trapped at the bottom of it, powerless, listening, and waiting for the next move. I realized then that the woman's voice upstairs was more than a sound. It was a reminder that we had been completely outmaneuvered, that the child we raised had built a life where even his parents had no place. I listened carefully that night, lying against the cold wall, trying to catch every word from upstairs. The woman's voice carried more than conversation, it carried strategy. She was calm, precise, almost amused at how easily the house bent to their will. I realized then that she had known about us from the beginning. Our son had never been alone in this. He had someone teaching him, guiding him, validating the choices that had turned our family upside down. My husband whispered, "She is relieved we are here. She said it would have been a mess if we were not." I could not speak at first. Relief? From the woman who was essentially a co-conspirator in our captivity? The idea made my stomach twist. I felt a surge of anger so strong I wanted to bang on the door, to scream through the walls and remind her that we were still human. But I did not. That would have made things worse, I knew. The stakes were too high. I pressed my hands over my face, and tried to remember the boy who had once run to me when he scraped his knee. The boy who had looked up at me with trust. The boy who had called me Mama. That boy was gone. And now, his mother and father were being watched, measured, evaluated by a stranger who had stepped into the role he had created for himself. My husband said, "Ruth, the basement is not punishment. It is management. And the woman upstairs is part of that management." The word management made me shiver. This was bigger than I imagined. Not just control, but planning, execution, and partners. People we did not know, who had invested time and energy into shaping the son we thought we knew. I pressed my forehead to my knees. The house above felt alive in a way that terrified me. It was no longer a home. It was a stage for power. And we were the audience forced to watch our own undoing. That night, I understood fully that the danger was no longer just our son. It was the system he had built, and the woman who made sure it stayed unbroken. I had always thought I knew my husband. After all these years, I had thought I could read him, understand him. But in the basement that night, I realized how little I had truly known. He began to tell me things I had never imagined. Choices he had made in silence, decisions that had rippled into our son's life in ways I could not have stopped. He told me about the money, how it came into our house years ago, how it seemed like a blessing at first, helping with bills, with college tuition, with keeping the house afloat. But it had not been clean. Not really. And he had made deals with men who did not forgive mistakes, men who watched and waited. He had thought he was protecting us, protecting our son, by taking what came to him and keeping quiet. But in truth, he had been building the foundation for the life our son now led. I felt my hands tremble against my knees. I had been married for decades, and I had trusted him completely. Yet every quiet choice he had made, every unspoken decision, had nudged our son down a path I had never even imagined. And now that path had turned into this basement, this darkness, this fear. I whispered, "You made him like this." He did not deny it. He only looked down, shaking his head. He said, "I tried to make it right. I thought I could manage it. I thought I could protect you both." But protection had never been real. It had been illusion. My son's strength, his cunning, his ability to control and manipulate, it had been shaped by the very life we thought we were building for him. And in that realization, I understood something even worse. The true betrayal had not come from him. It had come from us, our choices, our silence, our mistakes. I pressed my hands to the wall behind me. I felt like I was holding on to a lifeline that was fraying with every heartbeat. Upstairs, footsteps shuffled. A door clicked. The sound of whispered conversation carried down to us again. The system was moving, and we were still trapped inside it, powerless witnesses to the consequences of decisions made years before. The basement was no longer just a room. It was a place where the past had caught up with us, where every secret and hidden choice had finally grown teeth. The sound of sirens started in the distance that evening. And for a brief, wild moment, I thought it was help coming. My husband stiffened beside me, whispering, "Do not get your hopes up. This is not for us." We listened as the sound grew closer and then faded, passing the neighborhood without stopping. Our son had anticipated it. He had planned for it. Nothing would touch him or his operation tonight, or ever, if he could help it. I pressed my back against the wall, exhausted, and whispered, "How can he control everything so easily?" My husband said nothing. He only shook his head, his eyes haunted. He understood now that our son's world was bigger than the basement, bigger than us, bigger than anything we could imagine. The boy we raised had learned patience, strategy, and manipulation. He had learned survival in ways we never needed to know. And then we heard him again. Our son upstairs, speaking in that calm, calculated tone, as if nothing had changed. He was talking to someone on the phone, or perhaps to the woman beside him. My husband whispered. He redirected their attention. I asked who? He shook his head. "No one we know. Someone else will take the fall. Our names are safe for now." The thought made my stomach turn. Safe. For now. It meant nothing. It meant the danger would come back differently. It meant we were still part of the plan. I thought of the boy I used to hold. The one who had scraped his knee and cried into my lap. That child was gone. And in his place was someone I barely recognized. Someone who could wield fear like a weapon. Someone who could make his parents cower in a basement while the world outside went on without noticing. I pressed my hands over my face, trying to hold back tears I had not allowed myself yet. The sirens faded completely. Silence settled. And I realized, with a sharp, bitter clarity, that my son now controlled lives in ways I could never undo. Even ours. The basement was still, but the weight of the consequences had not left us. It would never leave us. The next day, he came to the basement alone. No footsteps from the woman, no shuffling above, just him. I could hear the calm in his voice before I even saw him at the door. I tried to steady my breathing, to summon the boy I used to know. I told him, "I want to see you just for a moment. Not the man upstairs, not the rules, just you." He paused. His voice softened, almost like the child who once ran into my arms, but it was filtered through a lifetime of anger and planning. "Mama," I said, "I am still here." I felt my chest tighten. There was a moment, just a second, when I thought he might come close, might touch my hand through the door. But he did not. He stayed on the other side, silent and controlled. I asked him why he had done this, why he had turned our lives upside down. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something fragile in his eyes. Something I had not expected. Fear. Not the fear of being caught, but the fear of the choices he had made. "Mama," he whispered, "love does not protect anyone anymore. Not from the world. Not from themselves." I swallowed hard. I tried to remind him of the boy he had been, of scraped knees and bedtime stories, of whispered prayers at night. But the words caught in my throat. He was too far gone. I asked him if he still cared for us. His silence said more than words ever could. And then he stepped back, closing the gap between us with the sound of retreating footsteps. The basement felt colder, smaller, heavier. I realized that the son I had raised was gone, replaced by someone shaped by fear, by survival, by decisions I could no longer influence. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to hold on to a memory of him, because in the darkness of that basement, it was all I had left. The next day, the house felt different. The woman upstairs was moving faster, talking louder, as if something had shifted in the plan. My husband whispered to me that she was panicking, though her voice did not betray it. He said she wanted to flee, but our son would not let her. He had built this life carefully and nothing, including her fear, could undo it. I pressed my back against the wall listening. I could hear the tension between them. She spoke, almost pleading, and he answered with calm authority, dismissing her concerns. And in that moment, I realized that even the person who had helped shape his operation felt powerless before him. I asked my husband if he could sense any hesitation in our son. He shook his head. For the first time, I wanted to believe that maybe something inside him could be reached, some shred of the child I knew. And then I heard it. A slip in his voice, barely there, but enough to make my heart catch. Fear. Not fear of us, not fear of discovery, but fear of failing, of losing control. I whispered, "He is afraid." My husband nodded. Quietly, almost to himself, he said for the first time, yes. The basement felt alive with that knowledge. Power had shifted slightly, though not completely. The illusion of control had cracks now. And I could sense it, even from the floor below. I told my husband that we had to hold on to that. Even if it was a small thing, even if it was just an observation, it was something. The footsteps upstairs paused, then moved again. Conversation continued, but the tone had changed. Our son was still the master of the house, but for the first time, he was vulnerable in ways he could not show us. I pressed my hands to my knees, feeling the tiniest flicker of hope. And I knew deep down that this flicker was dangerous, because hope in a basement ruled by your own child could be the most dangerous thing of all. That night, sleep came in fits, if at all. I kept hearing whispers from above, bits of sentences, the cadence of plotting. My husband lay beside me silent, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the way he flinched at every sound. The woman upstairs was restless. Our son was restless. And we were trapped in the middle of it, listening to the rhythm of power we could no longer influence. I tried to recall the little victories we had once celebrated as a family. Birthdays, graduations, Sunday dinners. Every memory felt fragile now, like it could shatter if I breathed too hard. I whispered to my husband, "How did it come to this?" He did not answer. He only held my hand tightly, as if we were tethered to each other to survive what was coming next. Then from above, a drawer slammed. A book fell to the floor. Our son's voice carried, controlled but sharper, correcting the woman in a way that sent chills down my spine. He was orchestrating everything, and she was following. Every movement, every word, a careful part of the plan. I realized then that this basement had become our world in a way we could not escape. Not just a room, but a microcosm of his power. A reminder that every decision we had made in the past had created this present. My husband whispered that we would need to be patient. That one small mistake could ruin everything. I nodded, though my stomach twisted with frustration. Patience was no longer virtue. Patience was survival. Hours later, I pressed my cheek to the cold wall and listened to them laugh, quietly, plotting something I could not understand. And I understood fully that our son's world had grown beyond us. Beyond reason. Beyond morality. And in that understanding, the basement felt smaller, the darkness heavier, and the hope we clung to thinner than air. We were prisoners not only of his control but of the truth we had ignored for decades. The night grew colder, and the basement seemed to breathe with us. Every creak in the floorboards, every whisper from above, made me flinch. I pressed my hands to my knees and tried to keep my thoughts steady. Survival was a delicate dance, and one wrong move could undo us completely. I asked my husband if he thought our son ever regretted what he had done. He shook his head slowly. Not regret, he said. Only calculation. Every action had a purpose. Every silence a weapon. I swallowed hard. Calculation. That word carried more weight than any scream, any yell. Our son had grown into a man who could see all possibilities, weigh them, and strike with precision. And we were trapped beneath it, waiting for the moment he chose to act. From above, voices shifted. I caught fragments. Words I did not fully understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Planning. Commanding. Dominating. The woman's voice was there too, softer, quieter, as if trying to temper him. I realized then that she had become an extension of his will. A mirror reflecting his strategy, his control. I pressed my forehead against my knees and tried to remember what it had been like to hold him as a child. The warmth, the trust, the love. That boy was gone, replaced by someone we barely recognized. The basement was no longer just walls and darkness. It was a testament to the life we had created for him, the mistakes we had made, the silence we had allowed. My husband whispered that we had to hold on. That patience was our only weapon. I nodded, though the weight in my chest was unbearable. Every sound from above reminded me that we were still under his control, still bound by choices we could not undo. And in that cold, dark basement, I understood something fully. Survival was not enough. We needed to watch, to learn, to wait for the cracks in his empire. Because the boy we raised was gone, and only in those cracks would we see a chance to reclaim something, anything, before it was too late. The morning came without light. Not real light, just the gray hush that filtered through the small basement window. I pressed my palms to the cold floor, and tried to steady myself. My husband stirred beside me, quiet, watching me, waiting for me to speak first. I asked him if he thought we would ever leave this basement alive. He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, tired, but steady. We might, he said. But it will not be the same life we knew. Never again. I swallowed hard. That was the truth I had been avoiding. Our son had changed everything. He had rewritten the rules. He had replaced fear with obedience, and love with leverage. And we were trapped in the consequences of choices made long before any of this happened. Upstairs, I heard movement again. The woman's voice, sharp now, directing. Our son's calm reply. I realized then that the plan was still in motion. The basement, the fear, the control. It was all part of a larger machine, one we could no longer influence. I pressed my back against the wall, and whispered to my husband that we had failed. Not just as parents, but as witnesses to our own lives. The mistakes we had made, the silence we had kept, had created this monster. And now we had no one to blame but ourselves and the boy we had raised into a man we barely recognized. A tray slid under the door. Bread, water, some leftovers. Routine. Control. Survival. I looked at it and realized that this small act was all that separated life from death in our basement. My hands shook as I took it, knowing that our existence was now entirely dictated by someone who had once been our child. I pressed my forehead to my knees and whispered a prayer I had not spoken in years. One for forgiveness, one for protection, one for the boy who was gone and the man who had taken his place. And in the silence that followed, I understood fully that nothing would ever be the same. The basement had taken more than our freedom. It had taken our innocence, our trust, and the life we once believed we controlled. We were alive, yes. But the cost was clear. Survival without reconciliation, and a lifetime under the shadow of our own son.